welcome to our show. Our CPUSA co-chairs, Joe and Rosanna, couldn't be here this morning, but I'm joined by Anita, welcome, and also by Ethan and Justine, who are both young trade union activists and activists for peace, justice, democracy, socialism, and all those other wonderful things we fight for. So the big news this morning, starting off, is that South Africa has initiated a complaint in front of the International Court of Justice against Israel for commission of genocide, for incitement to genocide, and for failure to prevent genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. So the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide demands of all states that are parties to it, including the United States and Israel, that we prevent genocide, and that's what South Africa is trying to do with its complaint. What can we do here, Anita? What's our responsibility here in the U.S. To see that our country upholds its obligations under that convention?
Well, I think we have to, first of all, publicize the speeches that were made. Reposting those speeches that were made by the South African diplomats in The Hague at the ICJ. They were really persuasive, showing that rhetoric that informs genocidal action goes from the top echelons of Israel's society all the way down through the soldiers on the ground, not Israeli citizens per se. And our comrade there, who we'll talk about, Ofer Kasif, really emphasizes that this ICJ case is not against Israel; it's against the Israeli government specifically. So I think educating our fellow Americans, but also educating them about the role that the United States has played over the years in buttressing a really untenable situation of domination and oppression of Palestinian people for decades now. And I think we have to look at our own government's complicity in that and challenge it every day.
Absolutely. And also ask for, keep up the movement for the ceasefire too, because that's the most immediate thing that the South African delegation is demanding. Provisional measures calling on Israel to stop immediately for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. And that's something that, we're working on here, and it's a movement we can continue to build. But Anita mentioned our comrade Ofer Kasif, who's a member of the Knesset in Israel from the Hadash coalition, who is facing possible expulsion from the Knesset for endorsing South Africa's complaint. Another of our comrades, Ada Tuma Suleiman, also from Hadash, a member of the Knesset, was suspended for calling for a ceasefire. So we're in this situation where, as the South African complaint details, members of the Israeli government have openly made statements of genocidal intent, referring to Palestinians as human animals, saying that the entire Palestinian nation is responsible, calling for the elimination of Gaza, and among other things, with impunity, while forces calling for peace face incredible levels of repression and censure. And that's a situation that seems to be unfolding here as well. Ethan, I'm thinking about attacks on university administrations, on teachers' unions, on student groups for speaking out against Israel's war on Gaza and in favor of Palestinian, in solidarity with the Palestinian people. So can you talk a little bit about the connection between the struggle for peace and the struggle for democracy? How do they connect with one another?
Yeah, the struggle for peace and democracy, especially When we look at how the world has been changing in terms of the rise of the far right everywhere, and the information that Anita's discussing about getting this information out, and we had a total blackout in Western media because we're looking at this issue where Israel is not necessarily a democracy. That we see it's a minority ruled democracy in the same way in which South Africa was prior to the end of apartheid. That's the democracy in which they lived in South Africa, and very similar to what we see in Israel in the censure of people, and voices all across the Western world of criticism that want to discuss peace, that people are losing jobs as punishment, retaliation. And this was quite intense at the beginning of the conversation, or the beginning during the conflict in October. We saw that with even party members losing their jobs for speaking out in favor of democracy and justice, and these values that we should have, and that we are told that is a birthright as an American. So you see the organized varieties of coalitions, if that's labor organizations standing up for the rights of their members, and to fall on the right side on this issue and making that argument. It's like, why are we supporting to the hilt a country in a war that we did not democratically vote for? I know all the upset and anger, especially when I was coming to age of George W. Bush shoving things war through without having formal votes, and we saw that this week. Biden coming back on campaign promises. The American people are sick of never-ending wars in the Middle East. So keeping up our relationships and our coalitions, and fighting forward and speaking truth to power is vitally important. And staying engaged, like I said, in our coalition forces, being engaged in your unions to push for this conversation, particularly in public sector unions, for our members to have the freedom of speech when it comes to educating our children, and then staying involved to be able to shut down and get engaged. When it comes to, say, the longshoremen in Portland or San Francisco and Oakland who honor our picket lines. So that's the importance of spreading this information and staying engaged in the peace struggle within our coalition forces.
Thank you. Absolutely. And we are seeing this reinvigorated democratic demand for the people to express their will on foreign policy, to say that foreign policy is not just something that's left to the executive branch or to the Pentagon or to a few think tanks. One of the mobilization, the growing mobilization of labor on this question has been really incredible, and just recently we saw so far the postal workers, the electrician, UE, the United Food and Commercial Workers, UAW, have all come out for a ceasefire. The Amazon Labor Union, and many state and local teachers unions have come out. And recently, Randy Weingarten, the president of the AFT, who's a staunch defender of Israel for a long time, tweeted that it's past time for a ceasefire, and that we need a solution that guarantees security and freedom for both peoples. So, Justine, what's, I guess, kind of a two-part question. What makes peace a labor issue? And what does this indicate about, labor's role and the role of the working class in the struggle for democracy?
Thank you. Yeah, peace, like all other issues, is definitely a labor issue. Um, I mean, first and foremost, labor could shut down this war by stop producing and sending the bombs and the artillery that we are sending to Israel. Um, but also labor is, or peace is a labor issue, excuse me, um, because labor represents the will of the working class. And we know that the vast majority of workers in this country are opposed to this war and are calling for peace. And they're opposed to continually sending aid to Israel and weapons to Israel uh, illegally. Biden continues to go around Congress to send these weapons of genocide and of death. And in fact, just yesterday, something that you didn't see covered on the news, just like you are barely seeing South Africa's case covered on the news here, is that the Biden administration bombed Yemen again. And it's hard not to see it as retaliation for the Yemeni role in defending Palestine. And that's why labor continues to fight for peace and will continue to call for peace and build it internationally, because it is our duty to end the imperialist weaponry that we send to Israel and send all over the world, um, and are hurting all of us, hurting the Israeli citizens who are fighting for peace, of course, most earnestly hurting the more than 30,000 Palestinians who have been murdered since October. Um, and that's why it's so crucial that we keep fighting. Like you said, we're seeing momentum build. We're working to educate our leaders and helping our leaders in the labor movement and helping them understand why they need to be calling for a ceasefire. And we're going to keep doing that until we make sure that everyone's on the right side of history.
Thank you. Yeah, the organized labor fights for the working class, and the interest of the working class is peace. This war is obviously, as Justine said, murdering people in Palestine. It's not helping the people of Israel who are, facing repression by a right wing government that our comrades in Israel have qualified as a fascist government, and it's not helping the people here in the United States because our needs are not being met. Our communities are being starved to fund subsidies for U.S. weapons manufacturers to send the weapons to Israel. And it has to stop. It's a democratic question, and we're going to move on to another facet now of the fight for democracy, which is the question around Donald Trump and the Republican primary. Primary season's here. Um, uh, the, um, the fights have started, and we've seen that Donald Trump has been disqualified from the ballot in a couple of states. Colorado, the Supreme Court disqualified him. In Maine, the Secretary of State ruled that he would not be present on the Republican primary ballot. Other states have reached other conclusions. California kept him on, Michigan and Minnesota as well. And there's a lot of discussion about, can we use the insurrection clause of the 14th Amendment to bar Trump from running for president? And would that be a good idea? Right? So we're going to do a quick kind of not so lightning round, just asking each of you, is this the right way to beat fascism? Is disqualifying Trump from the ballot going to advance the struggle against the extreme right? Anita, take it away.
I'd say we have to use everything in our power to defeat fascism. And if this works to just illuminate for some people, especially those folks who have been the staunch originalists of like people like Sam Alito and other really right-wing people on the Supreme Court, justices of the past. They're such strict originalists. Here, the language is so clear in the Constitution that really says that Donald Trump is ineligible to run for president again. It will be overturned by the Supreme Court, I'm sure. But I think it at least illuminates the clear connection that he has. He is an insurrectionist. We watched it happen in real time on January 6th. So I think it's, it might not work, but let's go for it.
Okay, Anita says, kick him off. Justine, what about you?
Absolutely. I fully agree with Anita. Um, as we know, in this country, we're in a bourgeois democracy. We're not in a workers' democracy. There's a lot of disenfranchisement. So thinking about this in purely idealistic terms around democracy um, is not the way to go. As communists, we know that, as Anita said, we need to use all of the tools at our disposal as tools to forward the struggle for real democracy, to forward the struggle against fascism, and removing Trump from the ballots as much as we can to push forward this struggle is exactly the way to go, because we need to keep him out of office. We need to keep all fascists out of office so that we can keep advancing the workers' struggle.
Thank you. But Ethan, so one of the objections to this is that what's required is a resounding sort of popular mandate against fascism, right? A resounding defeat of fascism at the polls. And if Trump is kept off the ballot by court decisions or sort of administrative decisions, are we seeking an administrative solution to a political problem, or are we, as Justine says, using all the tools at our disposal? What's your take?
So I'm also in agreement in terms with Justine and Anita regarding using all the tools at our disposal, because it's so blatant and obvious, the violations of the Constitution and just the norms and the functionings and the healthy functionings of bourgeois democracy to allow him to keep moving forward. So, and I'm in agreement with that, but it's very tenuous and difficult to constantly be battling out these huge issues through our court system that is, rigged against working people, against poor people, against women and people of color. Our, Constitution set up that way, and relying on them to enshrine our rights. I don't think gives the death blow to fascism that we need. I don't think it educates the American people or people in the United States on the issue of fascism and the danger present. And I don't think it necessarily is not it's not like a vaccine against future fascism. It's not an inoculation. That was the word I was looking for. So I think, continuing, how the party is, asked us to do is to build the broad-based anti-fascist coalitions. It's the best bet to prevent future issues. But I'm in agreement. Like every single tool we have to use, I just think this is the weakest to go through administrative or judicial rulings and parliamentary like rules and orders, and using that to disqualify versus defeating fascism in the realm of ideas and the out organizing.
Absolutely, and that you raise a good point there about the need for struggle. One of the things that the party insists on, Anita, is that we need to that we have to fight to win, right? There's no easy solution. There's no workaround. There's no loophole to getting to democracy. So when we think about these court cases against Trump or against the effort to apply the insurrection clause, which comes from one of these great Reconstruction amendments, right? To, intended to refound American democracy on a better footing. How does that fit with the notion of an electoral struggle, or with the trend we've seen toward people mobilizing around voting rights and around elections?
Well, I think we have to continue to fight for our democratic rights. I think we have to make it clear that these court cases and so forth are not undemocratic. They're part of democracy is, having a social contract of agreements. But I think we just have to keep on fighting for voting rights, for example, are a big part of democratic rights. And we're coming up to the election, 2024. It's going to be a big year, very difficult contests ahead. And I think we have to make sure that we make sure that every person has a right to vote and have their vote counted. And there's a lot of activity in these state legislatures to curtail voting rights. I think we have to really struggle against that.
Absolutely. And we have seen this incredible growing trend. So the capitalist class, the bourgeoisie, presents this image of voting like it's something that that's the only political act that average working class people can participate in. We show up once every couple of years at the polls, cast our ballot, and then go home, and that's how democracy works. But we're seeing all kinds of movements to change that. Grassroots movements to create independent redistricting commissions against gerrymandering, to preserve the right of citizens to present ballot initiatives, to protect voting rights, to expand voting rights, to restore voting rights to people with felony convictions. So there is this emerging understanding that democracy is something we fight for. We fight for it on every terrain. We fight for it when we struggle against white supremacy and male supremacy. We fight for it around voting rights. We fight for it in terms of peace. And we fight for it in terms of workers' rights to organize and bargain collectively. And that's kind of how we move forward. For our final, second to last segment, I guess, we're going to turn aside and look at a kind of broader question. Interesting article in the New York Times recently brought forward by one of our producers about driving accidents, automobile accidents. So up until 2019, we were doing pretty well, making progress on bringing down the number of severe automobile injuries and fatalities. But when the COVID pandemic and the lockdown hit, there was a sudden spike of aggressive and reckless driving, accidents, and severe injuries. So, what's the deal? What's happening? We often say, our tendency is to sort of blame capitalism for things. Justine, do you blame capitalism?
Always, 100%. Yeah, I think that this is a interesting, complex been going on. I think there's some ideological. I've seen speculation of some ideological things that are happening. As there's been more social breakdown, you're also seeing social breakdown on the road. So less observation, more disregard for the rules. I also think you mentioned COVID. It cannot be discounted, the sort of long COVID effects that happen on people's brains. There's been an increase, of course, in attempts at automated driving. And we also know that workers are being a squeeze. More gig drivers, more truck drivers facing tighter quotas, which force more dangerous actions on the road. So I think it's many things that are going on, ideological, physiological, structural, but I do think in many ways they're basically all tied back to the problems of capitalism in this country.
That's an excellent point, and that sort of tightening of the situation, right? The fact that everyone's under, or not everyone, most of us, the vast working class majority, are under more and more pressure, right? The squeeze is getting tighter, and that that increases sort of fear responses and aggressiveness. Um, is this something we're seeing in other areas of society as well, Ethan?
Do you say?
Yeah. Are we? Is this automobile accident spike? Is it? Do we see that? I don't know. Increase in pressure in desperation and whatever. Do we see that more broadly in society too, or is it just on the
Sure.
roads?
It's not necessarily the similar effects, and we're talking about the pandemic and the hyper individualization with the fail of the government. I guess we can, when it comes to pandemic response or talk about public transit, and we see this increase in, like, I visited New York a few months ago, for the first time since the pandemic, and there was more cars there than I'd ever seen before, and more individual ownership in, say, Brooklyn, so more neighborhood based. So you see that as, people with money are able to weather any type of storm and insulate themselves from the effects of capitalism or the failure of the government to step in and provide. And it's just a continuation of the individualism that is cultivated here in the United States. So yeah, there would be reverberations throughout other industries or other concepts beyond transportation and recklessness and selfishness that we see just ingrained and supported in the United States. I would say two alongside. At least anecdotally in my city, is a larger explosion of homelessness. So we see that the the effects of the pandemic on the economy, and how we're handling housing, and the individual aspect of all of that does reverberate, and we have not necessarily bounced back to pre 2019 numbers in a variety of ways.
Thanks. And I wonder if you know part of the solution is the idea of de-escalation, kind of on every front. De-escalation, of course, militarily, pulling back, um, you know, from this, um, these endless wars, but also de-escalating in terms of the amount of stress that people are under and the kind of situations that provoke um, aggressiveness in all kinds of contexts, and that in fact favorize the question that I would ask that wasn't brought up in the article, and maybe this is a good one for Anita, who's a sociologist, is how do uh, how do you think sort of male supremacy and white supremacy would play out in terms of this increase in traffic fatalities, this increase of aggression and reckless driving? Are they linked at all? Or?
Well, it's interesting. I don't want to stress too much the psychological aspects, the road rage and so forth. I'm sure plays a role, and we see it in airplanes as well. I mean, uh, flight attendants are having to deal with it, but it's also another aspect of capitalism is investment in infrastructure, and there you see in my city too, where big neighborhoods where a lot of immigrants live, a lot of refugees, new American communities. Are in it's sort of I've seen it, the suburbanization of poverty. These areas where there's a lot of big apartment complexes where the rents are relatively low, and then businesses, but these residents don't have cars necessarily and are facing high pedestrian deaths in those roads. And the rise in pedestrian deaths is really a big part of the whole traffic death situation. And it really does affect Black and brown communities in greater proportion, disproportionately. And as Ethan said, homelessness as well is another thing that puts more pedestrians on the streets. And just we know how to reduce those kind of deaths with more access for pedestrians, but those are and things improvements in the roads like installing roundabouts, for example, really cuts down on fatal injuries. But they are something that communities have to invest in, and they tend to make those investments in the higher income neighborhoods. So it just increases inequality in life chances in general.
Thanks. And you kind of got us to the last question on this. What's the communist solution? You know, the article proposed several ways of addressing the problem. One is, better infrastructure, adding more rumble strips to roads, more roundabouts, more bike lanes. Another was, tighter policing of speeding, so red light cams, speeding cams, things like that. What what's the communist solution? And maybe we can have each of you give us one aspect of it real quick. Another lightning round. Justine, communist solution.
Public transit, trains, abolishing cars where we can. That's the
Very
short answer.
nice. Ethan.
It would have to be walkable cities and public transit. I mean, there's no other solution that can really stands out. So,
Yeah. Anita?
I'd go with those road improvements that really cut down on pedestrian deaths as well as traffic deaths in general. Investment in public safety and putting safety first over cars going fast.
Absolutely. Yeah, public transit, infrastructure investments, fewer cars on the road. And also, I'm going to add just to the mix, we do need to kind of take some of the pressure off. I appreciate Anita's skepticism about the psychological roots of this, but if we can, make people so they're less stressed, less in a rush, and that has to do with changing the what people call the work-life balance, or recalibrating our lives so they're not constantly in service to employers and profits. And that kind of leads us to our mailbag question. Could we put that up? What is the correct communist stance on intellectual property? Is IP protectionism unjust and monopolistic, or can IP rights be maintained while opposing private property? Who wants to take a crack at this one? I love this question.
I see my face up there, so I'll go for it, Scott.
Okay, take it away, Anita.
Well, I think it really is an excellent question. I think we have to look at Marx as saying we don't give up our personal belongings. We only are socializing productive property. And most IP these days is held by corporations, not individuals. And I think we have to look at it as another form of corporate domination. And I think the best model for me is the free and open source software movement, where people really deliberately put their software code out there so that the world can tinker with it and make it better and improve it. That is something that really promotes progress in technology. But I want to stop short of. I think we have to be careful about cultural appropriation. Like there's so many cases in music production where brilliant musical genres were developed and then taken and other people making lots of money on it, and the original owners not really coming back to it. So I think we have to recognize people's contributions, but at the same time not let corporations take over private intellectual property.
All right, distinction between personal and private property. Anyone else? Ethan, Justine, want to weigh in?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Anita said. I would point out that historically intellectual property was an invention for propertied class, for private property. So I think that a lot of artists and other creative and cultural workers like the ideas that they associate with intellectual property of protecting their work, of fair pay, of recognition of their contributions. But intellectual property has never been about that. As Anita pointed out, it's solely about corporate ownership. So I think that protecting artists and respecting artists as workers, which is very important, is something we should forward. But I would disagree with anyone that thinks that intellectual property is the framework to do that. I think we need a new socialist framework to fight for rights of workers and respect of artists as workers.
And yeah, that's an important point, because we think of how intellectual property is created and what it represents. Very often, it it works kind of like automation in a certain way. When textile production was automated, for example, it was the skills of spinners and weavers that were taken and built into machines that became the property of the capitalist class. There was an expropriation involved in that, and that gets to what Anita was talking about as well. That we are against the expropriation of the producer by the owning class. We're against a system that makes intellectual property something where, for example, what's the guy's name? Pharmabro bought the rights to a certain formulation of insulin, I believe, and jacked the price up 700%. That's what capitalist intellectual property is. Socialism will be based on as Justine said, the protection of cultural workers and all workers as producers. Martin Shkreli, exactly, thank you. And I think that's it for today's show. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe, stay in the fight, and keep every forum you can fighting for a ceasefire. Educate your neighbors, family, friends, talk with your coworkers, write to your Congress people, call the White House over and over and over again. This has to happen. Later, comrades, and thanks again.
Thanks.